Are you a mom who loves fun, momming, and protecting your family? If you want to meet some of the most amazing people from all over the gun world and beyond, you are in the right place. Tune in for encouragement and sometimes just courage for moms and women just like you who are curious about shooting but are intimidated or just don't know where to start. Hey, all you tough mothers out there. I have got a really special guest today. This is my friend John. He is the most interesting man in the world that plays basketball with my husband. He is a retired Special Forces soldier, operative.
Sure.
Yeah, something like that. And he's got some really cool stories and experiences that I wanted to share with you guys. John, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of where you started?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've had a pretty eclectic career, coming out of high school, right into the military, into infantry, and eventually going to, you know, into special forces. I actually didn't stay active my whole time. I ended up getting out and actually went and became a deputy sheriff for a little bit and then finished my degrees and became a federal agent for quite a while. At the same time being a reserve in special forces. And then in 2006, left like a lot of guys, went over to Iraq and contracted a lot of special operations work. So, and ever since then, it's just sort of been security details, a variety of different assignments.
So for the uninitiated, a lot of times people, will throw out stuff like I was special forces or I was whatever designation. Like what's the big deal? Like what's the difference between the regular military and special forces?
Well, if this was the 80s and 90s when I was first in, there would be a much different answer. I mean, special forces in the Army or in any of the branches are about asymmetrical warfare and guerrilla tactics and all that type of thing. Nowadays, even the regular Army's very much leaning towards asymmetrical warfare a lot. And so the roles have somewhat changed. But in the Army, when we talk about special forces in the Army, we're talking about Green Berets is usually what we're referring to. And it differs from Navy SEALs mostly in just the branch of the military, quite honestly. A lot of the training and things cross over and are very similar. Assignments may differ depending on what part of special forces you may be in or what type of the SEALs, whether you're what they call a tier 1 or tier 2 operator. You may be doing hostage rescue, you may be out, doing counterinsurgency work. And in special forces, a large part of our work is working with what they call partisans, tribal members from whatever country we're working in, sort of living with them and working with them to either, overthrow a government or train them to rebel against a government of some sort.
Just casual conversations, right?
Casual conversations. That's right.
Like, how are you doing? How are your children? Would you like to overthrow your government?
That's right. And if you would, then sign here.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's about right. We just tend to have we just tend to leave a little bit of the ethnocentrism out of it, but it's pretty much your everyday cross-cultural conversations. So.
And you had mentioned like asymmetrical warfare. So what is that?
In a nutshell, it's just not your typical conventional warfare. We're not sitting in trenches shooting back and forth to each other. We're doing a lot more unconventional type warfare. We're behind the lines sometimes, maybe sabotaging equipment, maybe snatching up a few leaders and bad guys, or as we all know with the SEAL team and Bin Laden, going in and removing a bad guy from the scene. So, yeah.
So there's probably quite a bit of training, like as far as like talking to people, or diplomacy, like resolving issues, or like coming together and having like communication.
Absolutely. I think you'll find with anybody that's been in special operations, you'll find that a lot of them, and I think it may surprise a lot of people, it's not about, violence of action all the time. Certainly that's one of the answers sometimes, and it's the only answer sometimes, but diplomacy is a big part of special operations. You go in there and violently, and you don't always get everything you can out of it, whether it's intel or cooperation, or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of diplomacy involved. And when you're working with developing countries, unlike individuals in the Western US or the Western countries, in collective cultures, that one, 19-year-old, soldier from the country, the host nation, may be a direct relative to and have the ear of the president, and you can literally call him up. So you got to be very careful in the things you say and do. Be very careful not to offend, because it can have a trickle up effect very quickly. So,
Right.
yeah.
So like dealing with those kind of situations, and I'm definitely going to ask you about some,
Sure.
certain circumstances that you've gone through. Like, what has that taught you about just dealing with like your day-to-day stress? Like, I'm imagining like that translates over to like dealing with your kids or just difficult people.
Well, yeah, I think it does, and I think a lot of guys you'll find are a little more tolerant of things, a little more patient. My kids will tell you they've never heard me yell their entire life, because I'm not a yeller. I don't get real angry. If I do get angry, I sort of take it out, ball it up real tight and repress it and take it out on somebody else, like your husband on the basketball court or whatever it might be.
He's actually said like, John is the most level-headed, cool, like never loses his temper guy. But we all know you probably don't want to make John angry.
Well, I don't get angry, but I don't want to say I don't get angry, but yeah, I don't think you'd ever see that. It's in my anger or my reaction is generally more calculated than emotional. But
is that something that you've developed or just like a natural like default?
I think it's both. I think there's a certain amount of personality inheritance you get from parents. My dad's a very low-key kind of guy, so it's probably a big part of that, as well as the training. And you learn, as you get older, just in life, not necessarily in the military, but maybe in the military a little quicker, the results of getting angry too quickly or getting angry at all. And, so you learn to control it and take your time and just sort of listen more. And especially when dealing with other cultures, listening is an important part of it. And it's not an easy thing to do, because in collective cultures, they generally never can answer a question yes or no. It's generally an anecdotal story just to get to the yes or no. So if you're not patient, then you can get very frustrated and miss the point. So
yeah, no, I get that. It's, I think my father, who is a pretty interesting person, used to say, if you can't control yourself, how do you expect to control the people around you?
Sure.
And that was very important to him. He never really lost his cool. I never saw him yell or do anything. My mother, on the other hand, that was a different story. But like, so when dealing with like stressful situations, like you basically just try to logically like think through everything that's going on, or like, how do you deal with that, especially with like life and death situations?
Well, you want to, obviously because it's such a complicated relationship when you're from two different cultures. I mean, being objective about everything, sort of open-minded about what they're saying, and really keeping things in context, which is probably the hardest thing for some people to do, because our context is from a Western lens. So if I'm dealing with somebody else, I can overreact to what they're saying or doing, or think something completely different. But so yeah, just sort of being open-minded is really helpful. I don't lose my train of thought here. I don't think I've ever really worked with guys in those environments that were not patient. I think it's part of what's selected. I mean, a lot of the guys in special operations, can be cowboys and sort of rebels, and it's sort of what you want out of them. But at the end of the day, if you kind of sit down and have a talk, if you put aside the guns and the violence and just have a talk about other cultures, other religions, you'll find that it's probably a surprising conversation that you'll see. A lot of them aren't hawkish. They don't want to go to war. They don't want to be in violence. They're actually lean the other way if they've experienced war. And like you asked earlier, they'll start leaning more towards diplomacy. So just as part of probably their training experience combined.
Yeah, I would imagine that. I don't think anyone is ever like, yeah, I would absolutely like my entire life to be imploded and to worry and fear for my life every single day.
You would be surprised. So, but in special operations, you don't get a lot of it. So,
all right. Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of diplomacy, but at some point there may or may not have to be like a use of force or some kind of escalation. Like, what makes that like that shift? Like, have you had situations where there was that shift where it just kind of went sideways and you guys are like, okay, now we have to use force?
We generally always prepare for it to go sideways. So you're always expecting it to go sideways. So, but yeah, I would say that most of the situations that I've been involved in Iraq, in the Middle East, especially have been resolved. There was an Anjuman in this village in northern Iraq, and he was a pretty wise old guy. And he was always, an Anjamin is like a tribal leader. And
Okay.
so when we would have sort of hostilities from, and what a lot of people don't understand is a lot of hostilities, especially post-conflict, come from the tribes because tribalism is so strong and they're opposing each other. And if, for instance, if an oil company comes in after post-conflict and wants to look for oil, and one tribe thinks that the other tribe is getting some sort of favoritism from them, whether it's employment or resources, whatever, it can create a very hostile, bloody situation. And as Westerners, we don't always understand that. So oil companies come in, oh, we can do this. Oh, they're upset. Who cares? And it just escalates from there. So in this particular case, that I would always get called to this area that Iraq called the Garmian. It's the hottest region. It's a very dry area of northern Iraq and Kurdistan. But whenever we would get out there, this Anjamin we'd always have this thing between us where he would say he'll bring the Kalashnikovs and I'll bring the tea, and we would all come and just drink tea, and you'd have all the various leaders from different tribes, and everybody's got their Kalashnikovs, but everybody's sitting around drinking tea and we're talking the matter out. And I would say easily 90% of the time we work it out over tea.
Right.
Sound real, manly and military like, but that's how most of it's resolved.
I think that the ultimate like manliness is being able to control that emotion and that resolve the situation, right? Anybody can, well, not anybody, but most people can pull a trigger. Very few people can pull it really, really well, but the person that can avoid that is awesome.
And that's exactly right. A monkey can literally pull the trigger and shoot at people. So it doesn't take any great skill set to just pull the trigger.
So how does that translate? Like if you wanted to speak to women who were interested in shooting, but we're just I don't really want to shoot somebody. I just want to protect myself. But how do I know what's that line? I mean, obviously it's a little difficult because you've had tons of training and experience, but there's got to be something that's okay, at this point, this is where you have to escalate it.
I think when it comes to training with the guns, I mean, I sometimes have a different perspective, but I think when you because shooting a gun is a perishable skill, you got to constantly be training. And if you're able to have the resources and time to do that, then that's what you want to do. You obviously want to go beyond just shooting paper. You want to be able to shoot from different positions and moving targets, things like that. But if you're only focusing on that one thing, it's not always going to be to your favor, because there's so much more when it comes to shooting another human being or taking it alive. There's a psychological aspect that you just don't get by shooting. You can shoot 100,000 rounds a day. It doesn't mentally prepare you to shoot a person.
Right.
So I think, along with those things, what I like to tell people, not just women, but just, a lot of crisis rehearsal in your mind, when you're at the grocery store. Imagine that somebody came at you, and what would you do? Just go through it in your mind, because your brain is still going to sort of absorb that as a training experience, whether you're physically doing it or just going through it mentally. And the more you do that and incorporate that, you'll know when the time comes. All that training of shooting and going through the mental preparedness is there to provide you a quick response when that fear factor kicks in, and when you realize that I might die here or something may happen to me, and then it'll be easier. It'll happen sort of instinctively.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had that where I have friends who are trainers or other people that have been in the military. They're just they're always running that scenario through their head, where they'll walk through something, or they're in a restaurant, or what if somebody walks in. And I've done training at other facilities that have 300-degree simulators, and you have to make those decisions and talk to people. But until you're actually in it, just they say Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face.
That's right.
Without that repetition and the plan, and at least thought, you kind of freeze and don't know what to do.
Right. Without a plan, even without a plan, it's even worse. I mean, obviously you want to plan and you want to prepare, but and you never know, even in the military. I mean, thousands obviously of men and women go through firearms training and you train for combat, but you just, until that moment happens, you don't know how somebody's going to react. You always hope there's a way you're going to react and that you'll respond the way you've been trained, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Right.
A lot of times I tell people, just get rounds down range. That's the best thing you want to do. At least it provides you a certain amount of cover. You don't have to put all the the bullets in, in a spot size of a quarter. Just put bullets downrange, and that's the minimum you want to do. So
right, and just get comfortable with like, okay, this is how I can draw. This is how I can, decide. Yeah. Sometimes they have like, training where there's different sides where one person's hostile, one person isn't, like thinking before you pull that trigger.
Yeah, and women a lot of times, they should train. Some people might think it's a little top, but you should train holding somebody's hand, like you're holding your child's hand, or with something across your chest or a thing on your back, like you have a baby with, because those are sometimes the situation that you're going to come into. And I think what people sometimes don't understand is we talk about fight or flight. There's certainly some good evidence out there that females didn't evolve this fight or flight type behavior like a male did, because a lot of times what we're seeing is females evolved more what they call tend and befriend rather than. So what happens through evolution is because females can't scoop up all their kids and run from a situation, it's not the flight part is difficult when they have children and fighting with your children around. So what we see through evolution is that females tend to create a lot of friendships with other females. So there's groups of females. And so understanding the psychology of the fight or flight and how you're going to react is an important part of training with, whether it's firearms or knives or whatever it might be. So
that's really good insight. And I didn't really even think of that. Like if I'm going to have my son with me, like under the arm, or, I do throw him a lot. So maybe I could just. That's
right. It
learn, pick him up.
Depends on the kid you like. So it depends on which one you have. So
I'm pretty fond of him. I have my older stepson who's amazing, but he's pretty mobile. He's almost 22. So I figure he can fend for himself.
Lay down cover fire. Maybe you pick that one kid out of the group that not really your favorite, and just do the cover fire.
Like a human shield. There we go. Right. Yeah. Get him one of those, like the ballistic backpacks, and then just.
That's right. Have them shield you the whole way. I agree.
I am not advocating that you use your children as a human shield. Just disclaimer, but still funny nonetheless.
I'm glad you put that disclaimer out there.
You never know. People get
it'll show up
about
on
crazy
TikTok
things.
And,
So okay, I'm going to ask you. So, what was your most interesting mission, and what was your scariest mission, or were they the same?
I think any operator goes into a situation that there's got to be some fear. If you don't have fear, which is again part of your basic instincts, probably the most primitive, emotion we have. So you got to have a certain amount of fear to react properly anyway. So it's just, again, I think as and other people have learned, it's just controlling that fear. And I would say they're all scary to that degree. Anytime you go into an operation where there's a lot of unknowns, obviously that raises the anxiety levels when you don't know, when you don't have much information, or the mission just is sprung upon you because it's more of a reaction towards something else. I don't know in terms of, they all kind of stick out and they're all very interesting. A lot of my most interesting operations have actually have been more in the private arena, because people are so weird and eccentric, and when you're being contracted by a big oil company or a wealthy person, it always becomes a very interesting operation. When they're military operations, they're very cut and dry, and you don't have all the environmental things coming in on you. You're not talking to all the principals and players. You're usually getting information from the top down, and it's sort of limited information. When you're in the private contracting world, you take on all those roles. You're getting all the information. You have to process it, plan, and you're dealing with sometimes with some very weird, wealthy people. So,
wealthy people, weird. That's it's so strange to me.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that.
That's right. So, yeah, I don't know if it's a result one or the other, if you become weird after being wealthy or vice versa, but yeah, it seems to be a prerequisite to something. So.
Hey, all you tough mothers, there was just too much good stuff to fit into one tiny episode, so we split it into two. Check out the next episode with the continuation of John and his ex-Special Forces problem-solving amazingness. Great job. You made it to the end. You are one tough mother. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to support the work that we do and keep the good lovin' coming, subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're listening. What's that? You're one of those crazy mother followers that wants more of this nonsense? You got it. Subscribe to the Moms Love Guns YouTube channel, follow us at Moms Love Guns on Instagram, and join our free private Facebook group to connect with other women just like you in an encouraging and non-judgmental community. If you want to share even more love, share your new favorite community with a friend or all of your friends, maybe even a few enemies, just to be safe. Get out there, overcome your fears, be not afraid. You have got this.